The message appeared on my phone at 12:40, 3 in the morning. I was half asleep, the screen's glow pulling me awake. A notification from a messaging app I barely used, from an account with no profile picture. Just a string of numbers as the username. The message said, "Your sister didn't die. They lied to you." I sat up in bed, staring at the words. Then I checked the username again. The account had been created that day. No other information. No previous messages. I typed back, "Who is this?" The three dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Someone who knows the truth. Check the county records. Sarah Mitchell, born 1989. No death certificate. Then the account went offline. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat with my laptop open, searching for Sarah Mitchell, my sister. The sister I'd been told died of pneumonia when she was 6 and I was 9. The sister whose funeral I'd attended with my parents in a small church outside Lansing, Michigan, in 1995. I was 38 now. A paralegal living in Grand Rapids, divorced 3 years ago, no children. My parents were both gone. My father from a heart attack in 2012. My mother from Alzheimer's in 2019. I had no siblings. No extended family I spoke to. My life was organized, solitary, manageable. And now someone was telling me my sister was alive. I requested Sarah's death certificate from the county the next morning. The clerk I spoke with said it would take 3 to 5 business days. I paid the fee and waited. The certificate arrived in my email 4 days later. I opened it, expecting to see her name, her dates, the cause of death I'd been told. The document didn't exist. The search had returned no results. I called the clerk back. She confirmed there was no death certificate on file for Sarah Mitchell, born in 1989 in Kent County. I said, "How is that possible?" She said, "Either the death wasn't registered, which is unusual, or it didn't happen." I said, "Can you check surrounding counties?" She said she'd try. She called me back 2 hours later. Nothing. No death certificate in any Michigan county. I sat at my kitchen table and tried to remember Sarah's funeral. I was 9. I remembered my mother crying. I remembered my father standing stiff and silent beside the casket. I remembered the casket being closed. I remembered being told it was better that way, that I didn't need to see her. I remembered the cemetery, the small gravestone with her name. I drove to the cemetery that weekend. It was on the outskirts of Lansing, a quiet place with rows of identical markers. I walked to the plot where I remembered her being buried. The stone was still there. Sarah Mary Mitchell, 1989-1995. Beloved daughter. I stood there for a long time. Then I called the cemetery office. I asked if I could verify the burial records for Sarah Mitchell. The administrator, a man named Gerald, said he'd need proof of relationship. I sent him my identification and explained I was her sister. He said he'd pull the records. He called me back the next day. He said, "There's no burial record for Sarah Mitchell in 1995. I said, "But there's a headstone." He said, "Headstones can be purchased and placed without a burial. It's uncommon, but it happens." I said, "So there's no one buried there?" He said, "Not according to our records." I hired a private investigator. Her name was Denise Ortega, recommended by a colleague at work. I met her at her office and explained everything. The midnight message, the missing death certificate, the empty grave. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you have any idea why your parents would fake your sister's death?" I said, "No." She said, "Do you have access to any of their financial records from that time?" I said, "I have some. After my mother died, I kept a few boxes of documents." She said, "Bring me everything you have." I went through the boxes that night. Bank statements, tax returns, insurance paperwork. In one folder, I found something I'd never noticed before. A handwritten note from my father dated June 1995, a month before Sarah supposedly died. It said, "Dr. Callahan, payment received. Transfer scheduled July 3. Thank you for discretion." I didn't know anyone named Dr. Callahan. I gave everything to Denise. She started digging. She found Dr. Victor Callahan, a psychiatrist who'd practiced in Michigan in the 90s. He'd specialized in child and adolescent care. He'd retired in 2010 and died in 2018. Denise said, "Your father was paying a psychiatrist. That suggests Sarah might have had a mental health crisis." I said, "But why fake her death?" Denise said, "To hide her. to commit her to a facility without anyone knowing. She started searching for long-term care facilities that existed in Michigan in the mid-90s. There were dozens. She focused on psychiatric hospitals and residential treatment centers. 2 weeks later, she called me. She said, "I found something." She'd located admission records from a private psychiatric facility called Cedar Brook, a place that specialized in children with severe behavioral and emotional issues. It had closed in 2007, but the records had been archived. Sarah Mitchell had been admitted on July 5, 1995, 2 days after she supposedly died. Denise said, "She was there for 11 years. She was released in 2006. I said, "Where did she go?" Denise said, "I don't know. But I'll find out." It took another month. Denise traced Sarah through Social Security records, employment history, and tax filings. She'd lived in Michigan until 2012, then moved to Ohio. She'd worked a series of low-wage jobs: retail, food service, housekeeping. She'd never married. No criminal record. No public footprint. Denise found a current address in Toledo. She asked if I wanted her to make contact. I said no. I'd do it myself. I drove to Toledo on a Saturday morning. The address was a small apartment building on the east side of town, old but maintained. I parked across the street and waited, not sure what I was waiting for. At 11, a woman came out. She was thin, wearing jeans and a jacket, her dark hair pulled back. She looked older than 45. She looked tired, but I knew her. I got out of my car and crossed the street. She was unlocking a bicycle chain to the railing. I said, "Sarah?" She looked up. Her face went still. I said, "It's me, it's Jenna." She stared at me. Then she said, "You shouldn't be here." I said, "I need to understand what happened." She looked around, nervous. She said, "Not here. Follow me." We went to a diner 2 blocks away. She ordered coffee. I ordered nothing. We sat in a booth by the window, and she wouldn't look at me. I said, "I thought you were dead." She said, "I know." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because Mom and Dad wanted you to think that." I said, "Why would they do that?" She said, "Because I was a problem they couldn't fix." She told me what had happened. She'd started having episodes when she was 5, violent outbursts, hallucinations, self-harm. My parents had taken her to doctors. They'd tried medications, therapy, everything. Nothing worked. By the time she was 6, she'd become dangerous. To herself, to me, to them. They couldn't handle it. They didn't know what to do. So they found Dr. Callahan, who recommended a facility. But they didn't want people to know. They didn't want the stigma, the questions, the judgment. So they told everyone she'd died. They held a funeral. They bought a headstone. They moved on. I said, "And you stayed in that place for 11 years. She said, "Yes." I said, "Did they ever visit you?" She said, "Twice. Once right after I was admitted. Once when I was 13. After that, nothing." I said, "What about after you were released?" She said, "I tried to find them. I went back to Lansing." The house was sold. I tracked Mom down eventually, but by then she didn't remember me. The Alzheimer's had already started. I went to see her once in the nursing home. She didn't recognize me. I said, "What about Dad?" She said, "He was already dead by then." I said, "Why didn't you contact me?" She said, "Because I didn't think you'd believe me. And I didn't want to ruin the memory they'd given you. It was easier for everyone if I stayed gone." I said, "Who sent me the message?" She said, "I did." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I'm sick, liver failure. I have maybe a year. And I didn't want to die with you still thinking I'd been gone this whole time." I sat there, trying to process it. She'd been alive. She'd been 15 minutes away for over a decade, and I'd never known. I said, "What do you need?" She said, "Nothing. I just wanted you to know." I said, "You're my sister." She said, "I haven't been your sister for 29 years. I said, "That's not true." She said, "It is." We sat in silence. Then I said, "I'm not leaving you alone." She said, "You don't have to do this." I said, "Yes, I do." Over the next few months, I helped her. I found her a better doctor. I helped her apply for medical assistance. I drove her to appointments. I stayed with her on the bad days. She didn't want much. She didn't ask for anything. She just let me be there. I also started gathering evidence. I found the admission records from Sidarbrook. I found the payments my father had made over the years. I found letters Dr. Callahan had sent, confirming Sarah's placement, and reassuring my parents that discretion was maintained. I contacted a lawyer, a woman named Alicia Raymond who specialized in medical malpractice and wrongful commitment. I showed her everything. She said, "Your parents committed fraud. They faked a death, possibly to collect life insurance or avoid legal responsibility. The facility may have been complicit if they knew." I said, "The facility is closed." She said, "But there may be assets. There may be a parent company. We can pursue damages." I said, "I don't care about money. I just want it on record what they did." She said, "Then we file a formal complaint with the state. We request an investigation." We did. The State Medical Board opened a review of Sidarbrook's practices. They found evidence of widespread misconduct, inadequate oversight, coerced commitments, falsified records. The parent company that had operated Sidarbrook settled with multiple families, including ours. Sarah received a settlement of $75,000. It wasn't much, but it paid for her medical care and gave her some comfort in her final months. She died in March. I was with her. It was quiet, painless. She'd made peace with it. Before she died, she said, "Thank you for not giving up." I said, "I'm sorry I didn't know sooner." She said, "You couldn't have known?" I said, "I should have asked more questions." She said, "You were a kid. You believed what you were told. That's not your fault." I said, "I'm still sorry." She said, "I know." I buried her next to the empty grave with her name on it. This time there was actually someone beneath the stone. I think about my parents and the choice they made. I think about how fear and shame can drive people to erase someone they love. I think about Sarah, spending her childhood in a locked ward, believing she'd been abandoned. I think about all the years we lost. I don't forgive my parents. I can't. But I understand that they were overwhelmed, desperate, and terrified. They made the worst choice they could have made, and they lived with it until they died. Sarah's gone now. But she didn't die alone, and the truth didn't die with her. If you've ever been told a lie that shaped your entire life, if you've ever had to uncover a truth that someone buried, you're not alone.